Hello students. So we stopped at this point yesterday. We were actually talking about China. That is, domestic value-added content of India's exports is pretty much higher as compared to China for most of the product groups. But then we find that there has been a recent increase in China's domestic shares. So if you give it a little thought, what has happened in China actually is now initially China has high import content of the exports, which means it is importing and then doing some value addition and further exporting it. Now, as a country acquires skills, it learns to make those imported inputs domestically. Okay, it learns to make the same imported inputs domestically, starts its domestic production, and hence increases the domestic value content of its exports. Now, that's a very smart move, and that's what all the countries do, and they should do, right? So, if you want to just search a little bit about Japan, now Japan was, in fact, the phrase made in Japan at one point of time corresponded to very shady products, right? Low quality products. So what Japan was doing was it was importing, it actually learned how to make the goods, went on far, many steps ahead and went into design of products. And now, of course, Japan is a name which is attached often with very high quality, sophisticated products. So this has been the journey of China. Okay, so we move on to the next topic now. Let's move on to the next page. So exports of network products. Okay, now in this section, what the authors have done is, let me put it in very simple English. Think about automobile exports. Okay, now when you think about automobile, the entire production process being fragmented because it is a network product. So think it this way, that the engine is being manufactured in one country, right? Seat covers are manufactured at one place, car stereo is being manufactured at another place, and finally all the inputs come at one place and one country assembles everything, and then the car as a whole is exported. All right. Now, what has happened is, if you look at from a different perspective, the total trade in this network product of automobile can be divided into two parts. One is the trade which happened for the final product, that is assembled product, which is the end product, okay, assembled product or end product, and the remaining part of the trade which is happening, it is just movement of engines and spare parts and stereos and seat covers, etc., which is maybe car handles, door handles, that is happening. So what these authors have done is, they have divided the entire trade in network products into two components. One is the assembly trade, and the other is the trade in the parts and components trade in PMC. Now I'm reading a line from here. It's the same page, but it's mentioned towards the end. So it says that when the country is a low-wage country, at what stage it is expected to enter into the network product? So a low-wage country is expected to enter into network products in the assembly stage. Okay, assembly stage. Now, as the country acquires more skills, wage rates keep going up, then the country may is likely to expand exports of parts and components. Read it again. It says a country to start with, a low wage country, is likely to first come into assembly and then later on start with more specialized tasks, that is production of parts and components. Okay. Now let's read the trends and patterns. So India's network product exports have gone up from 2 billion to 24 billion dollars now. So that's a growth rate of 22% per annum during this period. But try and compare this $24 billion with other countries. China is exporting $932 billion of network products. Korea, Thailand, even Vietnam has much more, 47 billion. That's one aspect. The second aspect is now we are trying to break this entire $24 billion into two parts. That is, how much is the share of assembly trade and how much is the share of trade in PMC. So we are expecting India as a low wage country and therefore it is going to come more in the assembly activity. Therefore, assembly trade is having a higher proportion as compared to the trade in PMC. Now, what about relatively richer countries? Let's scroll down a little bit. Relatively richer countries like Singapore, Malaysia are more present in PMC. Then Korea also, Korea has broadly similar shares for both assembly and PMC. But for low wage countries like China, Vietnam, India, of course, they have higher share of assembly as compared to the PMC. Now for Thailand, the share of PMC was higher than AP and then the pattern gets reversed, right? So these are trends for different countries. Let's move on to the next page. So as you can see, this is the diagram for exports of network products for different countries. So this highest curve, right? This is Singapore, this is this triangle, right? This is Korea. Now, where would you find China? That's this diamond, okay? So China is right here at the top. Where is India? Try to find India. It's here. So India is at the bottom. $24 billion is the total amount of network exports. And which is a country close to it? Now this graph, this curve is for Vietnam. Okay. So Vietnam was lying below us and now even it has improved its performance in the recent years. So even Vietnam has got in fact $47 billion, right? So even in the Vietnam's network exports are much higher than India's. Okay, so this is what you will get the discussion here. Let's quickly read it. India is still in the nascent stage of assembly line production. We are a very minor player in network products. Our share is just 0.5% in world exports of NP. 2000 it was 0.1%. See the figure for China, it is 20%, and India is just at 0.5%, right? So between these 2 years, for Malaysia, Singapore, shares decline, but for other countries, particularly China, it has gone up, and it has gone up both for the, not just for aggregate, but even for both components, parts, that is PNC as well as assembly. And Vietnam is surely emerging as an important hub for assembly related activities. Okay, so it was below India in the year 2000 and now it is more than double than that of India in 2014. So here in this paragraph, it talks about the share of NP in India's export basket has gone up from 5 to 7.7%. But here also we are far behind other countries. Now, network product exports, when we compare to the country's export basket, Korea, China, Singapore, it's much higher, more than 40%. So what we are saying here is China, for example, has a much greater share of network product exports in its total basket of exports. Whereas in India, out of the total exports, only 7.7% belong to the network products. That's too small, and that is why we are saying it's too small, and that hints that there is a huge, huge unexploited potential that remains for India. Okay, now growth in the share of NP in export baskets of China, Vietnam, India, it is driven mainly by assembly trade, whereas the share of PNC is largely unchanged. All right, so you can see these graphs. here what they are showing is the trade happening in different countries across the years, not just for the network products, but what is happening to its two parts. That is what happens to the PNC, right? And what happens to the assembly. So assembly has gone up for China, for Vietnam, assembly sharp rise, right? Then for Thailand, it is again assembly which is higher. For Singapore, it is PNC which is more important. Malaysia, PNC more important. Korea, they are almost the same. And for India, we have the curve here. That is, we have assembly products. This is not FP, this is AEP, right? Assembly end products. So for India also, it is assembly trade which is more important, which is much higher as compared to the share of PNC. Okay, so then they are talking about which product groups are exports concentrated in. So Malaysia, Singapore, their exports are concentrated in code 77, electrical machinery. But China and Korea, they have greater diversification. For China, 77, 76, that is communication, sound recording. Then 75 is also important. So all these three groups, 75, 76, 77, they occupy 34% of China's, right? So it's telecom, office machine, they occupy 34% of China's network products. Let me just scroll down a little bit. Yeah. Now for Korea, it is 77, even 78 for Korea. So 76, 77, 78 is almost 37% of of Korea's total merchandise exports. Now Vietnam exports are more concentrated in 76. Now let's talk about India. For India, it is 78, 78, 78 is the road vehicles. Okay. So that accounts for 4.3%, 4.3% of exports, and 77 has roughly a share of 2%. Because as we said earlier, India's trade exports of network products is just 7.7%, right? Total is 7.7% of total merchandise exports. So out of these, 77 and 78 are forming most of the proportion, most of the exports. Now for export share in 77 is very small rather, right? Which means there exists a lot of potential for India to emerge as a hub for electrical machinery. 78 was road vehicles, automobiles, and 77 is electrical machinery. So we still have some presence in road vehicles, but we have hardly any presence, very little presence for electrical, electronics, etc. Okay, so this is the curve which shows these are the codes which are given. So as you can see for China, you have 75, 76, 77. Now look at the length of the bars, right? Length of the bars, and look at the length, height of the bar for India. It's very small, okay? Less than 10, it was almost 7.7. Whereas for China, it was almost 37% or something. So if you look at it, they have a more diversified base, okay? But when it comes to India, our presence is very less. We are just there in 78 or in 77, right? The other things are very small. Okay. Now, where exactly we are exporting? So this is the geographical direction of exports. So I'm moving the curve down so that you can see the countries which are presented in the graph. So this is AEP trade, right? Assembly end trade. So this is East and Southeast Asia. This is Central, South, West Asia. Okay. Then we have Americas, then we have Europe, then we have Oceania, and finally Africa. So China is having a lot of trade with East and Southeast Asia, with others as well, even a lot with Americas. Okay, but when you look at India, East Southeast Asia less, but we are exporting more in Central, South, and West Asia. US is also less, Europe is also less, and we are exporting huge amounts to Africa. Okay, so out of all these countries, if you see the pattern for India is slightly different. India's presence in or India's exports to East and Southeast Asia are very, very small. Now, this was a story for assembly and products. Similar story, similar graph you will find for PNC also, right? We are exporting less to East Southeast Asia, and we do have a presence in Europe. We do have a presence in Africa also, much more than others. Okay, so the geographical direction, India is locked out of production network in Asia. All countries except India, East and Southeast Asia region accounts for an overwhelmingly large share of PNC exports. No evidence that India is improving its participation. So, how much was the share of East and Southeast Asia for exports of PNC? It's too huge, 75% for Vietnam, etc. The numbers. Now, a similar story for category of assembly product. For India, it is the largest category, Central, West, and South Asia, followed by Africa. Okay, now much of the recent growth observed in India's assembly products, that is road vehicles, is largely driven by demand which is coming from the African region, whereas Americas and Europe, if they account for relatively smaller share. Okay, so we have this paragraph now. Let's read that. So there exists a great potential for India to expand and intensify export relationships in NP with traditional developed countries, and India's exports of assembled cars, it has gone up significantly. Indian-made automobiles are unlikely to make way into the traditional richer country markets. We just have a comparative advantage in the relatively poor regions like Africa. So we must try and exploit the potential in rich country markets. And for that, we need to participate more in the electrical machinery and electronics. Okay, so we stop here and we are going to continue with the next part in the next session. Thank you.